Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our program entitled A Glance at the Word, which is broadcast live on Facebook every Monday and every Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. West Africa time, which is GMT +1. This morning, Monday the 8th of November 2021, the title of our topic is Unveiling the Devil's Plan of Mass Destruction, Part 7. Unveiling the Devil's Plan of Mass Destruction, Part 7. Let's read in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 1 to 3, then 25 to 33. Numbers, chapter 13, verses 1 to 3, then verses 25 to 33. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the commands of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. Now, verses 25 to 33. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back words to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they stood him and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Since the 18th of October 2021, we kept on talking of the plan of mass destruction that the devil has designed against us. We have summarized this plan in 5 main strategies, which are doubt, discouragement, diversion, defeat, and delay. So far, we have already developed 3 strategies, namely doubt, discouragement, and diversion. This morning, we are going to talk of defeat as a strategy that the devil uses to prevent us from fulfilling the perfect will of God in our lives. Defeat is a weapon or a strategy that Satan uses very often against Christians. Satan makes you feel like a failure so that you don't even try to fight or to do what you were about to do. The bad report here in the passage that we read, the bad report of 10 of the 12 spies, the bad report that they gave Moses and the congregation is a very good example of defeat as a strategy of the plan of mass destruction that Satan has designed against us. In verse 31, we read this. We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. This is what those 10 spies said. We are not able to go up against the people of the land of Canaan, for they are stronger than we. But in verse 1, God said, in verse 2, God said, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. So God has already given them that land, but they said, no, we are not able to go up against the people who are in that land. In other words, we cannot take the land that God has given us. They confessed their defeat ever before trying any fight. They gave up totally. They preferred to be defeated without fighting than to take the risk and fight for victory. They forgot that it was the will of God for them to conquer that land and make it theirs. Because God has given that land to them. God told them that He has already given them the land. He told them that they only had to conquer it, to conquer that land that He gave them, to destroy the people who were living in that land and take it for them. And let me ask this question. How could they think that they would be defeated while God Himself told them that they would destroy the people of the land of Canaan and settle there forever? They said that the people of Canaan were stronger than the children of Israel. How did they know that those people were stronger? Was there any competition to determine who was stronger than the other? Was there any competition? Have they forgotten how God defeated the Egyptian strong army at the Red Sea? They have forgotten all that. The devil convinced them that they were a total failure, and they accepted. And they said, yes, we are total failures. They wouldn't even try to conquer the land that God has given them. They preferred not to try to conquer that land at all. They accepted that they were a failure, and they were satisfied to remain in their defeat. They even wanted to go back to Egypt. They even wanted to go back to the lives of bondage. And that's not all. In verse 32, they said something very funny. They said this, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. They said that the land of Canaan devours its inhabitants. Yet they previously gave a very appealing description of that same land, which could lead to the conclusion that it is a land that feeds well its inhabitants. And in that same verse 32, they also say that all the inhabitants of Canaan were tall, which means that the land in which they were growing, or the land in which they were living, was a good land, a good that was feeding them well. But now they are saying this land devours its inhabitants. The inhabitants that they saw in very good health. You know, to make you feel like a failure, Satan will always change your perception of things. Satan will make you consider normal things as abnormal and wrong things as right. In the same way as he distorts the word of God, he also distorts our sight. He also distorts our vision. That same vision that God gave you, Satan will try to distort it so that you will have a bad vision of the situation, a bad vision of things. In verse 33, we read something even funnier and very crazy. They said this: there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. This is what these 10 spies said. You know, the 10 spies said, well, referring to the descendants of Anak, we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. The descendants of Anak were very tall. They were giants. This is true. This we know. And this made these 10 spies consider that they were looking like grasshoppers. So they were looking like grasshoppers that could be crushed under the feet of the descendants of Anak. The 10 spies were the ones who were considering things in that way. They were the ones who were considering themselves as grasshoppers who could be crushed under the feet of the descendants of Anak. But how could they be certain that the descendants of Anak were also viewing them as grasshoppers? They had no direct contact with the descendants of Anak to know what they were thinking of them. They had no contact at all with them because they were afraid of them. So how could they be certain that they were like grasshoppers in the eyes of the descendants of Anak? It was their own conclusion. It's what they themselves thought. So this feeling of failure comes when you turn your back to God or to the word of God and focus on the problem that you are facing. They focused on the stature of the descendants of Anak. When they focused on the descendants of Anak, they concluded that the descendants of Anak were viewing them as grasshoppers that they could crush under their feet. It's themselves who made that conclusion. It's themselves who said that it wasn't the descendants of Anak who told them that we are seeing you as grasshoppers. And you know, this is also what happened in the days of King Saul. Let's read it. Let's read 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Here we will read from verse 4 to verse 7, then verse 16, then verse 24. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 to 7. And a champion went out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Now, verse 16. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Verse 24. Verse 24. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. You see, the men of Israel saw the man Goliath. They directed their sight toward Goliath. They put their focus on Goliath, not on God. It is when they had that sight of Goliath, when they focused on Goliath, that they were afraid. They were afraid of the man's stature. They were afraid of the appearance of Goliath, because they focused on him. And this is what Satan does with us. He seeks to make us focus on the problem that we are facing instead of focusing on God. There was only one man who focused on God, a young man, David. That is why he defeated Goliath. But for 40 days, the children of Israel, those soldiers, the army of Israel, they were only focusing on Goliath. When Goliath was coming forth, they were looking at him and they were afraid. You know, fear or fright make us feel as failures. When you are afraid of your problem, you will be a failure. When we focus on the problem, we will consider that problem as unsurmountable. We will definitely be defeated when we focus on the problem. But when we focus on God, we will definitely be victorious. And the devil, Satan, wants you and I to focus on the problem instead of focusing on God. He wants us to consider the problem that is in front of us and draw conclusions. Decide that the problem is unsurmountable. Decide that we cannot solve that problem. Decide that we are defeated by that problem. Decide that we are a failure. That is what he wants you and I to decide, so that we will actually be defeated, so that we will actually be failures. But when we focus on God, we will definitely be victorious. When we focus on God, we will clearly understand that God is far much greater than any problem we may be facing. We will understand that. And we will understand that He who is in us, He, God, who is in us, is greater, far greater than he who is in the world, than the problem that we are facing, than the spirit that is behind that problem that we are facing. So let's never focus on problems. Let's instead focus on God and on the Word of God. And in that way, we will always be conquerors. We will always be victorious. We will even be more than conquerors. Dear brethren, never focus on your problem. Focus on God, the solver of all problems. God bless you abundantly beyond all your expectations, and have a very fruitful week.